Hi everybody, welcome back. Thanks for calling in again on a bit of nostalgia really. For those of us of a certain age will remember back to the 70s when Airfix first released this kit in 1971. Lovely Roycross box art there. I think these are probably the original Airfix instructions. They've not been redone in Airfix's current modern instruction method, which is a bit of a disadvantage. We'll come on to that a bit later on. The parts are really nicely moulded. This kit was last available in 1975, so it only had a very short run of 4 years, and I think because of that the moulds have stood up really well. I don't know where the moulds have been all this time, 50 years nearly, but the moulding's really good, and as we'll see, the fit of the parts is good as well. I remember building this kit when it was available during those 4 years sometime, and I think it was moulded in white originally. I might be wrong about that, and came in the old Airfix plastic bag with the paper header with the instructions. Those of us that remember kits in those days will remember the slogan, "Please open carefully, instructions over leaf." The chassis going together here, just fitting the swing arms and the rear axle. It's really quite well detailed. The springs here could do with a bit of refinement really. You might want to replace those altogether with some coiled wire, but I'm not too bothered. This is just a quick build. I just made a saw cut along the springs where the mould seam is, just to open the spring up again, and that was quite enough for me. This wishbone for the single front wheel is quite a complicated arrangement, especially here where we've got the steering rod, which is 3 separate parts actually, and it's fairly difficult to understand from the instructions, the original Airfix instruction drawings, how that goes together, so it's a bit of trial and error really. We get a very basic engine in the kit, just a block gearbox. There's what looks like an oil filter on it as well, sump and exhaust. And the parts go together really nicely. This is the belts on the front and the pulleys, and I'm just assembling the whole chassis so that I can just paint it black overall. Just preparing the bodywork now, and it's in 3 main parts. This one that I'm prepping now, the underside to that with the rear mudguards, and also the separate cover. I'm just checking at this point because I didn't know if the chassis will fit in between this lower part of the bodywork, so I'm just testing that now, and it will do, so that means that I can glue the 2 halves of the body together. The downside of that is that you have to remove the spacer bar, which you can just see below the assembly there, and because of that you've got to be careful to get the correct alignment of the, particularly of the rear mudguards. or wheel arches. Just cleaning those joins up with a fiberglass pencil. It's nice and gentle on the plastic, just removes any bits of glue, tidies the bodywork up ready for primer. This is the prop shaft. It's important to preserve the ridge which goes along the bodywork at that point, and I'm just checking that the top half of the bodywork will fit, and it's a really good fit, it's really nice. Smoothing it in so that once it's painted it will be all fared in properly. At this stage I've just given the model an overall coat of Mr. Surfacer 1500, that's the finishing surfacer, and I've also painted the chassis with their 1500 black. The main body colour is Tamiya LP51 pure orange. This is a lacquer paint, and it's actually possible to get a fairly good gloss with these lacquer paints. They dry very quickly, although subsequent to this I left the body for 24 hours just to make sure that the lacquer paint had fully cured. And I'm just applying the orange in nice light even coats. So this is really just a tack coat at this stage, just to make sure that the bodywork's free of major bits of dust. Because I'm filming this, I wasn't able to do it in the spray booth with the extractor on, so building and painting a model at the bench has the disadvantage of not being able to paint in a dust-free environment in the spray booth. But actually the orange went on pretty well. Got a little bit of work to do a bit later on in the video just to clean it up. The orange is quite translucent. I think it's a bit like yellow really. When you're using paints of these colours, they do tend to be a bit translucent, so you've got to build the colour up gradually. This is the second coat going on. A bit heavier this time. I've made sure that I've removed any initial bits of debris in the tack coat. The paint is thinned about 50% with Tamiya lacquer thinners. As you can see, we're starting to build a bit of a shine up now. But I will be adding to this with some 2-pack top coat. Although the lacquer paint does dry fairly quickly, it's just as well to cover it up whilst it's flashing off under just a plastic cover. Any cover will do. And On with the decals. There's not too many decals for this model. Certainly more, I suspect, than the original release. We've got some tyre pressure notices here. They may have been in the original release, I can't remember. These are printed by Cartograph, so they're really good quality, although I did run into problems with the black band over the rear of the bodywork. Just making sure that this front badge is lined up properly along the centre line. So this is the decal that I struggled with. I actually got it misaligned and had to move it around to a point where I tried to lift it and it twisted in on itself and got into all sorts of contortions. So with that, I just had to put it back in the water to unravel it. That's the only hope. At one stage I thought a call to Airfix was on the cards, but I managed to recover it. It is a bit long, so you've got to carefully remove both ends where it passes over the wheel arch, just to get it flush with the wheel arch. It would have been better actually had the decal been the exact length. It would have been easier to position if it had have been the exact length. But that settled down eventually after running into difficulties with it, which was fortunate. So you can see there's a decent gloss on the paintwork at this stage, but we'll improve that in a moment. Just prepping some of the other parts now. And what I like to do is to break sections down and keep parts on the sprue if I can. Just makes it easier to paint. So I'm just cutting off sections that can be painted like that. Throughout the video you'll probably hear pick up rain on the skylights above the bench. It's been a terrible July and August, start to August in the UK, and especially in the north. So we've got that soundtrack of rain beating on the shed. Got a nice driver figure, which I'm going to fit because it just adds a sense of scale to the model. This is a small little vehicle, so having the driver there just helps you judge the scale of the car. And you can see here I'm just positioning the steering wheel in his hands, gluing it so that that can be all painted as one. This is the fuel tank on the rear cover. I'm just making a little refinement here with some brass tubing just to replace the rear end of the exhaust pipe. That's so that you get the hollowed out effect at the end. Just needs the silencer drilling out to the correct dimension. And the correct length of brass tubing. The rear of the exhaust is actually angled, so I'm just cutting that angle with a file. It's worth doing. The exhaust is visible at the back. So again, here I'm breaking sections of sprue off, ready for painting the parts. So onto the clear coat now. I'm using Zero Paint's 2-pack, which has got the finish, the hardener and thinners. And clear in the instructions the ratios that you've got to mix this to. Generally 1 part hardener to 2 parts finish and about 10% thinners, although I thin it a little bit more than that. And again, we use a tack coat. Gives you the chance there to remove any bits of dust, and this needs building up nice and steadily. It's easy to pool it, especially if you thin it to the sort of degree that I do. And again, under our cover, because this does take longer to dry, it's 24 hours for it to harden, so it will pick up dirt and dust in the first hour or so. But when this hardens, it's a really tough, durable finish, and it can be sanded back, flatted and polished. We'll do that in a moment. It's important to wear a respirator. It's really quite toxic. So at this point I had the skylights open, plenty of ventilation. And again, cover it up. So just over a day later at this point, and the clear coats had chance to harden. So we're going to go in now with some micromesh. I've got both micromesh sheets and pads, and gradually just work through the grades onto that clear coat until it polishes out. So really, you're looking to get out any bits of debris that you might have picked up. It's very difficult to apply a clear coat, especially in these conditions, without getting any bits and pieces in it. And after the sanding, I go through the routine with Tamiya compound. There are 3 grades of compound, as you saw: a coarse, a medium and a finish. The only thing with using compounds like this is to just be careful around the edges, particularly sharp edges, and any bumps or things like that, because you can wear through on the edges and where the paint's less dense. So just take care, and eventually you'll get a decent shine. One other thing with car roofs like this is just to support the part that you're polishing, because the A-pillars on the car are quite fragile, and with lots of flexing, sanding them and polishing them, it's easy to flex them too much and eventually they'll crack. Here I've masked off the interior. Now this is where the instructions aren't very clear, because the interior of Bond Bugs were actually the fiberglass, so they would have been orange really, but on such a small model It's quite difficult to see in there anyway, so I was quite happy just to paint the interior in the black. It would have involved quite a lot more masking and polishing and so on, so I wasn't too bothered about just making things easy for myself by doing that interior black. But the instructions don't give any painting guide for that, so it would be easy to miss. So I've got some photographs of these cars, the classics now I guess, which show that the interior was the fiberglass orange. I'm not sure what colour the underside would have been, but just for ease I painted it black as well. Finishing off the parts on the engine, got the fan to go on the front, and just some CA to glue the chassis into the underside of the bodywork. It's 4 location points and it's a nice positive fit in there. The exhaust doesn't fit as Airfix show in the instructions. The drawings in the instructions show it going underneath the cross members there, but it actually goes above them, as you can see. It's the only way that that will fit. Just dry brushing the what passes as an instrument panel. This would have been orange originally on the car as well, with some black detail on it. The handbrake and gear lever. The brake and clutch pedals fit into the recess just on the inside there, although it's not drawn like that. As I said, in the instructions are vague, so it's the only place for them to go really. Here I'm just adding a black wash, a very delicate black wash to the wheels, which I've painted in Mr. Hobby Chrome. So that just brings out the detail of the nuts. Onto the driver figure now, and you can let your imagination go here a bit. I'm trying to remember what I was wearing in 1971. There's a memory that some of the colours were a bit gaudy. I may be being a bit conservative here with him. I'm not a great figure painter, but you're only going to see him through the side window really. So I probably spent about an hour backwards and forwards painting the figure. Could spend an awful long time on him. As I said, he's very well moulded, so a good figure painter would really make something of him, I think. I'm using Citadel colours for this figure. They paint really nicely with a brush, and you can blend them, and they go on really well. Now I have a memory that in the 70s it was fashionable not to wear socks, so my man isn't. I might be wrong on that, maybe it was a bit later. Maybe he just doesn't have any socks. Just a little bit of dry brushing to bring out the detail a little bit. And his shirt has the classic leather laces at the top. He's a real 70s man. Just a bit of wash on the face. He's colour coded for his trip out in the Bond Bug with a contrasting blue shirt and a matching orange neckerchief. Nearly there. As I said, it took me about an hour playing around with this. It was quite fun to paint, and at this stage I'll pop him into the car. I just fixed him in with some PVA, and just because I'd glued the steering wheel in his hands whilst in the car, it went back in fine. This is bare metal foil to add to the chrome trim around the door gutters and other bits and pieces on the car. This is self-adhesive, and it really is one of the most effective ways of reproducing chrome, particularly on vehicles. It's very flexible and just needs positioning and burnishing down, in this case with a cotton bud. I think maybe a chrome pen, a Molotov chrome pen or something like that would do a reasonable job as well, but there's nothing quite like bare metal foil for that job. And rather than paint the windscreen wiper, single windscreen wiper you'll notice, I'm using bare metal foil for that as well. But rather than do it in one piece, I've just cut little strips, 3 separate parts for the wiper. Just need to carefully remove any excess with a very sharp new number 11 X-Acto blade. You can also burnish it down with a sharpened toothpick or cocktail stick, and again just cut the excess off. It takes a lot of care to do that on a polished gloss surface. If you make a slip, you ruin the finish. But it's worth the effort, I think. So I'll put the, let's call it a canopy, I'm not sure what you'd call it really. Just fit that again with some PVA, don't want to be risking CA. And polystyrene cement wouldn't burn through the top coat. So PVA does a good job. This is canopy glue actually, it's nice and strong. And just leave that to set. Canopy glue used like that probably takes a couple of hours to bond. A bit more bare metal foil around the windscreen. Same process. Again, we trim the excess off with a sharp blade. This is canopy glue again, and I just put some spots in the corners. Sorry about the lighting there, it's the rare bit of sun that we've had this week coming through the roof lights. Last few bits of decals now. Now I didn't fit these originally with the other decals because I didn't want the top coat over them, the clear coat. So they're slightly duller. Airfix offer the little bug, orange bug emblem there as a separate decal in case you want to paint that black panel, but it's a good fit and I decided just to use the big decal. Just finishing the various transparencies. These are the front indicators which I've trimmed off, painting clear orange, with the rear indicators as well on the rear light cluster. We've also got some red for the brake lights there. Again, a tiny bit of canopy glue for the indicators, as we call them in the UK. I think they're called turn signals or turn lights in the US. Airfix recommend painting those just in solid orange, but I think they look nicer with clear paint on them. And we've got to make sure the vehicle's taxed. So we've got our tax disc. Airfix give us some decals for the window surrounds on these side doors. but I decided to paint the whole door in semi-gloss black. These were actually plastic windows, and Airfix have done a really nice job. There's a really nice moulding effect on the windows which gives the impression that it's rippled plastic. You might be able to see it when the light catches the window. I added some mask gold to the headlamps, which I'm just removing at this stage, and I've backed the headlights with some bare metal foil again, some chrome, so that you'll get the shining effect through the back of the lamp. They're not the best fit, these lights, and it might be preferable to actually fit them before painting and just paint the whole assembly in the orange when you're doing the rest of the bodywork. But they don't look too bad. I've backed the rear light clusters there with some bare metal foil, as you can see, so we've got a chrome surround to them, and we also get some shine through the clear paint as well. Put the wheels together now. So these have just been painted rubber black, and you've seen that I painted the wheels themselves in the Mr. Hobby chrome. Put the front wheel on first. And the fit of these back wheels is slightly problematic. On my build, I found that they stuck out too far from the wheel arch. So what I had to do was just trim the axle a little bit. But the other thing that was obstructing the fit was this, which is the bottom of the spring, which I also trimmed off as well. And that just allows the wheel to sit flush up to the suspension. And it's got a much better position then in the wheel arch. It sits much better. Just some finishing touches now, a nice coat of Tamiya modelling wax, just to finish the shine off. It's nice stuff this, I use this on a lot of my models. Available in Europe, not in the UK, but it's good stuff. Just a little button on the back, and the last thing to do is just put the fuel filler, which I'm doing in chrome. Just a little disc cut from the bare metal foil and pushed into position. And there she is, a very diminutive little vehicle. I don't recall ever seeing one on the roads in the UK. There won't have been that many built, I don't think. And there's probably around 200 left licensed in the UK at the moment. And it's a really nice little kit from Airfix. I'm sure my effort in the 70s wasn't quite as good as this one, but I have to say I'm quite pleased with it. So there we are, a bit of a trip down memory lane. And if you want a bit of fun, it's a nice, cheap, fairly easy to build model. and give it a go. So if you're not of 70s or 60s vintage, maybe go back and have a look at some of these Airfix vintage classics. A lot of them are well worth a revisit. So I hope you like it, everybody. I enjoyed building it. It's great fun and a nice bit of nostalgia for a few days. So back to the serious stuff next, and I'll be cracking on with the Typhoon and of course catching up on the Bismarck build. So hopefully I'll see you for the next video fairly shortly. Bye for now.